Your Honor, that's a lie. The entire courtroom gasped. The deep, commanding voice had come from the defendant's table, where a teenage boy in an orange jumpsuit sat, his hands clenched into fists. Judge William Carter, a tall, gray-haired man known for his strict courtroom, froze mid-sentence. His gavel hovered in the air, ready to slam down for order. The lawyers, the jury, even the security officers stood still as if the world had paused. No one ever interrupted a judge like that. But 16-year-old Jordan Carter had just done it. The room buzzed with whispers. People turned to each other, wide-eyed, mouths agape. Who did this boy think he was? A kid in cuffs, shouting at a federal judge? The security guards took a step closer, their hands hovering near their weapons. But Jordan wasn't finished. His eyes burned with something stronger than fear. Y'all want to hear the truth? His voice shook, but not from fear. From anger. From desperation. Because what he's saying right now, it ain't the truth. Judge Carter's face darkened like a brewing storm. His fingers gripped the bench. Silence. His voice boomed through the courtroom, but Jordan wasn't backing down. The boy inhaled sharply, his chest rising and falling. He looked straight at the prosecutor, then back at the judge. And then, in a voice so clear that the whole courtroom leaned in to hear, "I know who really did it." The room exploded. Lawyers jumped up, people in the audience gasped. The judge slammed his gavel so hard it echoed like a gunshot. The guards rushed forward. And that's when everything went from bad to worse. 3 months earlier, it was a hot summer evening in Chicago, and Jordan Carter was running. Not for exercise, not for fun, but for his life. His sneakers pounded the pavement, his breath came out in ragged gasps. His heart felt like it would burst out of his chest. Behind him, sirens wailed. Red and blue lights flashed against the brick walls of the alley. "Stop!" a voice shouted. Jordan kept running. He didn't know what was happening. 1 minute, he was walking home from the corner store, a soda and a bag of chips in his hand. The next, he heard gunshots, pop, pop, pop. And then, suddenly, the cops were after him. He had no gun, no drugs, nothing, but he knew better than to stop. Black boys who stopped didn't always make it home. Up ahead, he saw a fence. He pushed his legs harder, faster. He jumped, but it was too late. A hand grabbed the back of his hoodie and yanked him down. Jordan crashed to the ground, his chin scraping the pavement. Got him. Rough hands flipped him over. A knee pressed hard against his back. "Where's the gun?" An officer barked. What gun?" Jordan choked out. His chest burned. His body ached. "The one you just used." "Don't play dumb." Jordan's head spun. Gun? He didn't have a gun. He never had a gun. More officers arrived. He felt cold metal clamp around his wrists. "You're under arrest for the murder of Officer David Reynolds." Jordan stopped breathing. Murder? The world blurred. The words didn't make sense. A cop was dead, and they thought he did it? "No," he croaked. "I didn't. I swear, I didn't." But they weren't listening. They never did. The ride to the station was a nightmare. The police radio crackled with updates. Suspect in custody. Black male, late teens, wearing gray hoodie. Officer Reynolds pronounced dead at the scene. Jordan sat in the back seat, staring at the floor. His hands trembled. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. They threw him into a holding cell, and he sat there for hours. His mom didn't know where he was. His little sister, Ava, was probably waiting for him at home, wondering why he hadn't brought her favorite snacks. Tears burned his eyes, but he blinked them away. He had to stay strong. But how? The next morning, a woman with sharp brown eyes and a blue blazer walked into the interrogation room. She set a folder down and looked at him like she was studying a puzzle. "I'm your lawyer," she said. "My name is Vanessa Moore." Jordan swallowed. His throat was dry. "You believe me?" Vanessa hesitated. "Tell me what happened." Jordan told her everything. The store, the gunshots, the police chasing him. When he finished, Vanessa let out a long breath. "They say they have evidence against you. Witnesses. Camera footage." Jordan's stomach dropped. "That's a lie." She leaned forward. "Then we have to prove it." The trial date came fast. Too fast. The courtroom was packed. Jordan's mother sat in the front row, her hands clutching a tissue. His little sister, Ava, wasn't there, probably for the best. The prosecutor, a tall, stern man named Richard Fields, painted Jordan as a violent gang member. He was seen fleeing the scene, Fields said. A known troublemaker in his neighborhood. Jordan clenched his fists under the table. He had never been in a gang. He barely even got into fights at school. Vanessa fought hard. She poked holes in the case, questioned the so-called evidence. But it didn't seem to matter. The jury looked at him like he was already guilty. Then, Judge Carter started reading his statement. His cold, emotionless voice filled the room. The evidence presented strongly suggests that the defendant, Jordan Carter, is guilty of. And that's when Jordan snapped. Your Honor, that's a lie. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, the gavel slamming. Jordan's heart pounded. He knew what he was about to say could change everything. He took a deep breath and said, I know who really did it. And then, a gunshot rang out. Someone screamed. Chaos exploded in the courtroom. Guards rushed to cover the judge. People ducked, running for cover. And Jordan turned toward the sound. His body went cold, because standing at the entrance of the courtroom, holding a smoking gun, was someone he knew. Someone no one would have ever suspected. For a split second, time stood still. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. The echoes of the gunshot bounced off the marble walls of the courtroom. People were still screaming, ducking, running, some rushing toward the exit, others frozen in fear. But Jordan's eyes were locked on one person, the shooter. His breath caught in his throat. His body stiffened, his mind refusing to believe what he was seeing. Standing in the doorway, gripping the gun with shaking hands, was Caleb Johnson, his best friend. No, this couldn't be happening. Caleb's dark eyes darted around the room wildly, like a trapped animal. His hoodie was pulled up over his head, sweat dripping from his face. His hands trembled around the gun, and in that moment, Jordan knew this wasn't planned. Caleb wasn't here to kill anyone. He was scared. But before Jordan could say anything, bang, another gunshot. People screamed louder. Jordan flinched, but this time the bullet didn't hit anyone. It shattered one of the courtroom windows, sending glass raining down. Caleb's chest rose and fell fast, his eyes darting from Jordan to the judge to the security officers who were now raising their weapons toward him. Drop the gun, an officer shouted. Caleb didn't move. He looked at Jordan, his eyes pleading, desperate. Jordan knew what he had to do. He had to stop this before Caleb got himself killed. Caleb, Jordan shouted over the chaos. Put it down, man. Please. Caleb's eyes locked onto his. Something inside him seemed to break. His hands trembled harder. Jordan stepped forward, ignoring the guards shouting at him to stay back. It wasn't me, was it? Jordan said, his voice shaking. I didn't kill that cop. Caleb's lips trembled. Tears pooled in his eyes. Jordan swallowed hard. Tell them, Caleb. Caleb's grip on the gun loosened. His breathing was ragged, broken. For a split second, it looked like he was about to drop the weapon. But then, he's got a gun, a guard shouted. And just like that, everything went wrong. Bang, bang, bang. 3 shots fired. Caleb's body jerked. His eyes went wide. The gun slipped from his hands. And then, he collapsed to the ground. The courtroom went silent. Jordan felt his knees go weak. His ears rang. His stomach twisted so hard he thought he might throw up. He ran forward, ignoring the hands trying to hold him back. Caleb. He fell to his knees beside his best friend. Caleb's chest was rising and falling, but his breaths were shallow, his hoodie turning darker with blood. No, Jordan choked. His hands hovered over Caleb's wounds, useless, shaking. Caleb's lips parted, but no words came out. Jordan leaned in close. Caleb, stay with me. Please, man. Caleb's lips moved again, barely a whisper. I tried. His voice cracked. I tried to tell the truth. Jordan's chest tightened. Tell me now, okay? You can still tell me. Caleb's eyelids fluttered. His breathing hitched. And then, his body went still. Jordan froze. The world around him blurred. Distant voices, rushing footsteps, but nothing felt real anymore. Tears burned his eyes. His best friend, the one person who had always been there, gone. Jordan's hands curled into fists. His whole body shook, not just from grief, but from something darker, rage. Because now he knew the truth. Caleb had known who really killed Officer Reynolds. And someone, had forced him to keep quiet. Now Caleb was dead, and Jordan was the only one left to finish what he started. He would prove his innocence. He would find the real killer, no matter what it took. But first, he had to get out of here. Because right now, all the cops in the room were staring at him. And Jordan knew exactly what they were thinking. They thought he planned this. They thought he was behind it all. He was still a prisoner. And now, he was a suspect again. The room was spinning. Jordan's heart pounded so hard it felt like it would rip out of his chest. Caleb was dead. His best friend was lying lifeless on the cold courtroom floor, blood pooling around him. And now, every cop in the room was pointing their guns at Jordan. "Get down. Hands behind your head." Jordan barely processed the words. His body was frozen. His mind a storm of rage, confusion, and grief. Caleb had come here to tell the truth. And now, he was gone. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. Jordan gritted his teeth. "They think I did this." He saw it in their eyes. The way the officers moved, the way the judge backed away like Jordan was some kind of monster. His lawyer, Vanessa Moore, was screaming something at the guards, but Jordan couldn't hear her. All he could hear was the sound of his own breathing. In, out, in, out. He had two options. Drop to the floor and let them take him. Run. His whole life, he had been told never to run from the police. It only made things worse. It made them chase harder, shoot faster. But he also knew something else. If I go back to jail, I'll never get another chance to prove I'm innocent. He had to escape. He had to find out who really killed Officer Reynolds. And he had to do it fast. A second passed. Maybe two. Then, Jordan moved. He grabbed the nearest chair and flipped it over, sending it crashing into the officers in front of him. The split-second distraction was all he needed. He turned and ran. Shouts exploded behind him. "Stop! He's getting away!" Jordan's legs moved on their own. He leaped over Caleb's body, his heart breaking all over again as he did, but he forced himself to focus. The exit. He had to reach the exit. Gunshots rang out behind him. He ducked, weaving through the chaos. The courtroom doors were just ahead. Then, bam! A guard tackled him from the side, slamming him into the marble floor. Pain shot through Jordan's ribs. He gasped, his vision blurring. "Stay down, kid," the officer snarled, shoving his knee into Jordan's back. Jordan struggled, but the weight was too much. He felt cold metal clamp around his wrists. No, no, no. The cuffs tightened. And just like that, he was trapped. The guards yanked him to his feet. His chest burned. His wrists ached. He could still hear the murmurs in the room. The judge's voice. "This boy is a danger to the court." The prosecutor's voice. "He should be locked away immediately." The jury's whispers. He heard the words. Killer. Thug. Gangbanger. But none of them were true. And now, Caleb, the only person who could have cleared his name, was dead. The guards dragged him toward the back exit. Jordan's mind raced. He couldn't let it end like this. He had to fight back. As they pushed him through the hallway, he turned to Vanessa, his lawyer. She was walking beside him, her face pale, her hands shaking. "Vanessa," he whispered. She looked at him, startled. "I need you to get me out of here." Her eyes widened. "Jordan, I didn't do this," he hissed. "You know that. But they're gonna lock me away forever. Please." She hesitated. Then, for the first time since the trial began, Jordan saw it, the doubt in her eyes, the wheels in her head turning. Maybe, just maybe, she believed him. But then, before she could say anything, an officer shoved Jordan forward. "Move it, kid." Jordan's heart sank. As they marched him down the hallway, past rows of reporters and flashing cameras, one thought kept pounding in his head. He needed a plan. Because if he didn't figure out a way to escape soon, he was never getting out of this alive. The cold steel cuffs dug into Jordan's wrists as the officers shoved him forward. His heart pounded against his ribs, his breath coming out in quick, uneven gasps. The hallway outside the courtroom was swarmed with reporters, their cameras flashing, microphones being shoved forward, voices overlapping in a chaotic blur. Jordan Carter, did you plan this? Is this proof you're guilty? Did your friend Caleb Johnson attack the courtroom to help you escape? Jordan clenched his jaw. He wanted to scream the truth, that he had nothing to do with this, that Caleb was trying to tell the truth, that someone had killed a cop and was framing him for it. But no one would listen. No one ever did. The guards yanked him past the crowd, leading him toward the courthouse's underground holding cells. Jordan knew what was coming next. He'd be thrown into a van, taken back to jail, and locked away forever. Unless he did something. Now, Vanessa Moore, his lawyer, was walking a few steps behind, her hands clutching her briefcase so tightly her knuckles turned white. Jordan caught her eye. She had the power to stop this. She could file an emergency motion. She could demand they pause the case. She could argue that Caleb's sudden attack proved something bigger was going on. But she wasn't doing anything. She looked scared. Vanessa, Jordan said, his voice low but urgent. She hesitated. Jordan, you know I didn't do this. He spoke quickly, desperate. Caleb knew the truth. He came to tell it. But now he's dead. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You saw his face, Jordan whispered. He was scared. Someone made him stay quiet until today. Vanessa's eyes flickered with something, doubt, maybe, or realization. But then, before she could answer, an officer shoved Jordan forward. Keep moving. Jordan's mind raced. Think. He had one chance. As they neared the elevator leading to the underground holding cells, Jordan's instinct screamed at him. He had to run. But how? His hands were cuffed. The courthouse was filled with cops. Cameras were on him. Then, he saw it. A janitor's cart parked against the wall, filled with supplies. A mop, a bucket, and, most importantly, a can of industrial-strength cleaning spray. Jordan's pulse quickened. This is crazy. This is stupid. This will never work. But he had no other choice. As they reached the elevator, he made his move. With all his strength, he kicked backward, slamming his heel into the officer's knee. The man yelled in pain, stumbling. Jordan spun, throwing his weight to the side. The second officer lunged, but Jordan ducked, slamming his shoulder into the janitor's cart. Crash. The supplies scattered everywhere. The mop clattered to the floor. The bucket tipped over. And Jordan lunged for the cleaning spray. Stop him. But it was too late. Jordan gripped the can, spun around, and sprayed it straight into the guard's face. The man screamed, staggering back, his hands flying to his eyes. The second officer grabbed for Jordan, but Jordan was faster. He dove under the cart, rolling to the other side. The elevator doors dinged open. Vanessa stood frozen, her mouth open in shock. Run, Jordan shouted. She hesitated. Then, for some reason Jordan would never understand, she hit the emergency stop button on the elevator. The doors snapped shut, and Jordan ran. He bolted down the hallway, his hands still cuffed, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. Shouts exploded behind him. Get him! He dodged past a security guard, slammed his shoulder into a side door, and burst out into the alley behind the courthouse. Fresh air. For a split second, he was free. But then, sirens. Jordan turned his head, and his stomach dropped. 5 police cars screeched into the alley, tires burning rubber. Officers jumped out, guns drawn, barking orders. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Jordan's breath came in ragged gasps. His legs ached, his wrists burned, and then, a black van skidded into the alley from the opposite side. The door slammed open, and a voice, one Jordan hadn't heard in years, called out, "Get in." Jordan's entire body went cold. His heart stopped, because sitting in the driver's seat was his father, a man who had been dead for 6 years. Jordan's body locked up, his chest squeezed so tight he couldn't breathe. The black van sat in the middle of the alley, engine humming, exhaust smoking. And behind the wheel, his father, the same father who had died in a robbery gone wrong when Jordan was 10 years old. The same father whose face had been in a newspaper article, his body covered by a white sheet on the cold pavement. But now, he was right here, alive. "Get in!" his father shouted again, his deep voice cutting through the sirens. Jordan's legs felt glued to the pavement. This couldn't be real. The police were closing in. "Get down on the ground," an officer roared. Jordan snapped back to reality. It didn't matter who was in that van. All that mattered was, it was his only way out. Jordan ran. Bullets whizzed past him, striking the brick walls of the alley. He lunged forward, diving headfirst into the van as the tires screeched. The door slammed shut, and then the van took off. Jordan tumbled against the seat, his hands still cuffed. His breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. His father's hands gripped the wheel tightly, his jaw clenched as he maneuvered the van through the narrow streets, swerving past cars, ignoring red lights. Jordan's heartbeat hammered. It was just him and this man who looked exactly like his father. Same strong jawline, same tired, brown eyes, same rough hands gripping the wheel like he had done this a million times before. Jordan swallowed hard. Who are you? His father's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, cold and unreadable. "You already know the answer to that," he said. His voice, it was exactly the same. Jordan shook his head, his throat tight. "That's impossible. You're dead. I saw the pictures. The news. I was at your funeral." His father exhaled sharply, like he was debating something. Then he said, "No, you were told I was dead." Jordan felt like the world had flipped upside down. His whole body trembled. What does that mean?" His father didn't answer. He just pressed his foot harder on the gas. The city blurred past them. Jordan's breath hitched. He felt like he was going to throw up. "What is happening?" His voice cracked. "Caleb is dead. I'm being framed for murder. And now you're alive?" His father's grip on the wheel tightened. "I know." Jordan froze. "You know?" His voice rose. "You know?" His father's jaw clenched. "I know everything, Jordan. And I know who really killed Officer Reynolds." Jordan's blood went ice cold. His head snapped up. "What?" The van swerved onto an abandoned road, kicking up dust. His father pulled into an empty parking lot behind a rundown building. The van screeched to a stop. Silence. Jordan's father put the van in park, exhaled, and turned to face him fully for the first time. His eyes were sharp, serious, like he had been waiting for this moment. "I need you to listen to me, Jordan," he said. "You were never supposed to be in that courtroom today. Caleb wasn't supposed to get killed. But whoever framed you, they're bigger than just one cop getting murdered." Jordan's hands curled into fists. His wrists ached from the cuffs, but he barely noticed. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His father leaned forward. "I mean, you've been caught up in something way bigger than just a murder case." Jordan's stomach twisted. His father's face darkened. "And if you don't start running now, you're going to end up just like Caleb, dead." Jordan swallowed the lump in his throat. His body shook. His father was supposed to be dead. Caleb was supposed to be alive. And now, Jordan was on the run. He thought things couldn't get worse. But then, a shadow moved outside the van. A second later, glass shattered. Gunfire erupted. The bullets ripped through the windshield, missing Jordan's head by inches. His father cursed, ducking. "We've been followed." Jordan barely had time to react before the side of the van was ripped open. A masked man lunged inside and grabbed Jordan by the throat. Jordan choked. The masked man's grip was iron-tight around his throat, cutting off his air. His lungs screamed for oxygen. His legs kicked wildly as he was yanked out of the van and slammed onto the pavement. Pain exploded through his back. His skull rattled. The world spun around him. Gunshots rang in his ears. His father was shouting, something about getting up, running, but Jordan couldn't move. The masked man leaned in close, his breath hot against Jordan's face. "Wrong place, wrong time, kid," he growled. Then, he pulled out a knife. Jordan's stomach dropped. The blade flashed in the dim streetlight, aiming straight for his chest. Time slowed. Then, bang! A bullet whizzed past Jordan's ear and struck the masked man in the shoulder. The man grunted, stumbling back, his knife clattering onto the pavement. Jordan gasped, sucking in air, coughing hard. He turned his head just in time to see his father, standing by the van, gun in hand. His father had shot the guy. Jordan's mind barely had time to process that before his father grabbed his arm and yanked him up. "Run, Jordan." His legs moved on their own. Adrenaline flooded his veins. He barely felt his body as he sprinted down the alley, his father right behind him. Behind them, more masked men appeared. They weren't cops. They weren't random thugs. They were something worse. Who the hell are these guys? Jordan gasped as they dodged around a dumpster, bullets zipping past them. His father didn't answer. He just grabbed Jordan's cuffed hands and yanked him into a side alley. The shadows swallowed them whole. They crouched behind an abandoned car, heaving. Jordan's wrists ached from the cuffs. His lungs burned. He turned to his father, his voice sharp. "Are you going to tell me what's going on now? Or do I have to wait until I'm dead too?" His father's jaw tightened. He peeked over the car, checking for their attackers. Then, finally, he exhaled. "I was never supposed to die," he said. Jordan's stomach flipped. "What?" His father's eyes were cold. 6 years ago, I wasn't killed in a robbery gone wrong." He paused. "I was erased." Jordan's mind spun. His hands shook. His father wasn't just alive. He was a man who had been hiding for years. Jordan felt his whole world crumble. His mother had mourned. His family had buried a coffin. And now, "What are you saying?" Jordan whispered. His father exhaled. "I was part of something bad. And when I tried to get out, they made sure I died." Jordan's breath caught. "Who is they?" His father didn't answer. Instead, he turned and grabbed Jordan's handcuffs. "I'm sorry, son. I didn't want you caught up in this." Then, he pulled out a key and unlocked the cuffs. Jordan's wrists sprang free. He rubbed them, blinking in shock. His father had a key? He had planned this? Jordan's mind reeled. None of this made sense. His father was supposed to be dead. Caleb was supposed to be alive. And now, masked men were trying to kill them both. Jordan exhaled sharply. "No more secrets," he said. "No more lies." He locked eyes with his father. "Tell me who really killed Officer Reynolds." His father hesitated. Then, finally, "It wasn't you." Jordan clenched his jaw. "I know that." His father nodded. "But the people who did?" His voice darkened. "They work for the same people who tried to kill me." Jordan's breath hitched. Before he could ask what that meant, boom, the alley exploded. A black SUV came barreling toward them, headlights blazing. Jordan's father grabbed his arm. "Run." Jordan barely had time to react before the SUV's doors flew open, and more masked men jumped out. This wasn't just a random attack anymore. These people weren't just after Jordan. They were after his father, too, which meant the truth about who framed Jordan for murder was bigger than he ever imagined. And if he didn't figure it out soon, he was next. The SUV screeched to a stop. Four masked men jumped out, their weapons drawn. Jordan's father shoved him behind a stack of wooden crates. "Stay down," he ordered. Jordan's heart slammed against his ribs. His hands shook. His father crouched beside him, pulling a black pistol from his jacket. "Are you serious right now?" Jordan whispered fiercely. His father didn't look at him. He checked the magazine, cocked the gun, and whispered back, "I'm very serious." Jordan's pulse raced. He had never seen his father like this. He wasn't just a man who had come back from the dead. He was a man who knew how to survive. The masked men fanned out, moving slowly, methodically. They weren't just random thugs. They were professionals. Jordan's stomach churned. His father pressed his back against the crates and whispered, "We have two choices." Jordan swallowed hard. "And those are?" His father glanced at him. "One, we run and hope we're faster than the guys trained to kill us." Jordan grimaced. "And two," his father checked his gun, "we fight." Jordan's hands clenched into fists. "We don't even know who they are," he hissed. "What if they're cops?" His father shook his head. "They're not cops." Jordan's breath hitched. "How do you know?" His father's jaw tightened. "Because I used to work for them." Jordan felt like the ground had just vanished beneath him. He stared at his father, his chest tightening. "You, what?" Before his father could answer, bang, bang, bullets ripped through the crates, splinters flying. Jordan ducked, covering his head. His father cursed, firing back. The gunshots echoed through the alley. The masked men took cover behind the SUV. Jordan's mind spun. He couldn't believe this. His father, his dead father, was in a full-blown shootout with trained killers. And somehow, he was winning. His father moved like he had done this before. Every shot precise. Every movement calculated. This wasn't just some man who had disappeared for 6 years. His father had been somebody dangerous. Jordan's stomach twisted. Who was his father? And what had he gotten himself into? Jordan, move. His father's voice yanked him back to reality. Jordan snapped his head up, just in time to see one of the masked men charging straight at him. Jordan's body moved on instinct. He spun, his foot slamming into the attacker's knee. The man grunted, stumbling. Jordan lunged, grabbing the gun from his hand. The masked man threw a punch. Jordan dodged, barely. Then, he swung the gun like a club, smashing it across the man's face. The guy collapsed. Jordan's chest heaved. His hands shook. He had just taken down a trained attacker. He didn't have time to process it, because now, 3 more were coming. His father grabbed him, pulling him toward the edge of the alley. "We need a car," his father muttered. Jordan barely had time to think before his father pointed to an old sedan parked nearby. "Get in," his father ordered. Jordan's eyes widened. "You're stealing a car now?" His father didn't even hesitate. He ran up to the driver's side, pulled a knife from his boot, and jammed it into the door lock. Jordan's mouth fell open. His father picked locks? Who was this man? The door clicked open. His father jumped in. "Hurry." Jordan hesitated for half a second. Then, bullets whizzed past his head. Nope. No time to question this. He jumped into the passenger seat. His father reached under the dashboard, yanked a couple of wires. The engine roared to life. Jordan's jaw dropped. "You? How?" His father didn't answer. He just slammed his foot on the gas. The tires screeched as the car peeled out of the alley. Jordan twisted in his seat, looking back. The masked men were scrambling for their SUV, but Jordan knew they wouldn't make it in time. They had escaped. For now, Jordan turned to his father, his breath ragged. His mind spun with a million questions, but only one came out. What the hell is going on? His father gripped the wheel tightly, his eyes locked on the road. "I told you, Jordan," he said. "This is bigger than you think." Jordan's fists clenched. No more cryptic crap. No more half-truths. No more running. He turned to face his father, his eyes burning. "Tell me everything. Now." His father was silent for a long moment. Then, he exhaled. "All right." He glanced at Jordan. "You want the truth?" Jordan nodded. His father's hands tightened on the wheel. "Then you need to know this." He took a deep breath. "The people framing you?" His voice was low, deadly serious. "They're the same people who killed Officer Reynolds." Jordan's blood ran cold. Before he could respond, the car was T-boned, slammed into from the side. The impact flipped the sedan over. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and Jordan's world went black. Chapter 8. Jordan's world was spinning. Everything was upside down. His ears rang. His vision blurred. The car was flipped. He was hanging from the seatbelt, his body dangling in midair. Glass shards glistened around him like stars. The metallic scent of gasoline and blood filled the air. His father groaned beside him, his own seatbelt straining against his chest. Jordan blinked hard, trying to focus. What just happened? 1 second, they were driving. The next, boom, they had been hit. And now, footsteps. Heavy, fast, coming closer. Jordan's pulse spiked. The people who had crashed into them, they weren't here to help. He turned his head, his breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. His father was struggling, trying to reach something. Then Jordan saw it. The gun was lying on the roof of the flipped car, just inches out of reach. His father stretched, fingers grazing the handle. Crash. The driver's side door was ripped open. A masked man reached in, grabbed Jordan's father by the collar, and yanked him out. "No!" Jordan shouted, struggling against his seatbelt. The man slammed Jordan's father against the pavement. A second masked man appeared, aiming a gun directly at his father's head. Jordan's lungs seized. They were going to kill him. Move. Move. Jordan's fingers scrambled for the seatbelt release. His pulse pounded in his ears. His father looked at him, his eyes fierce. Run. His father mouthed. Jordan froze. No. Not again. Not like Caleb. His father turned back to the masked man, his lips curling in defiance. Go ahead, he growled. Shoot me. The man pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing. Jordan's heart stopped. The masked man stiffened. His gun jammed. Jordan's father moved like lightning. He lunged, slamming his fist into the man's throat. The second masked man reacted too slow. Jordan's father grabbed the jammed gun and whipped it across the guy's face. The man collapsed. Jordan's breath hitched. His father turned to him, wild-eyed. Jordan, get out of the... A third masked man appeared, and this time, he didn't hesitate. Bang! The gunshot ripped through the air. Jordan screamed. His father stumbled back, clutching his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. Jordan's world shattered. No, not again. Not again. Not again. Rage exploded in his chest. With a roar, he finally yanked the seatbelt free and fell out of the car. His body hit the pavement hard, pain shooting through his ribs, but he didn't care. His father was bleeding out. The masked man turned toward Jordan, raising his gun. But Jordan was faster. He snatched up a shard of broken glass and threw it as hard as he could. It slashed across the man's face. The man stumbled back, screaming. Jordan lunged, grabbing his father's arm. Come on. His father groaned, his face pale. Jordan, get up. Jordan hauled him up, his heart pounding wildly. The masked men were recovering. More were coming. They had seconds. Jordan spotted a narrow alley ahead. He threw his father's arm over his shoulder and ran. His father stumbled, blood dripping down his side. Jordan didn't stop, didn't look back. Gunshots blasted behind them, bullets ricocheting off the brick walls. He kept running, until a car screeched to a stop in front of them. Jordan froze. The driver's side window rolled down. Vanessa, his lawyer. Her face was pale, terrified. Get in, she screamed. Jordan's father didn't even hesitate. Jordan threw open the door, shoved his father inside, and jumped in after him. Vanessa hit the gas. The car peeled out, bullets chasing them down the street. Jordan's chest heaved. He turned to his father. Blood still oozed from his side. His face was tight with pain. Jordan's hands shook. This was too much. Too many questions. Too many lies. He turned to Vanessa, his voice hoarse. Why are you helping us? She didn't take her eyes off the road. Because I know who's behind this, she said. Jordan's stomach dropped. Vanessa's grip tightened on the wheel. And if we don't stop them soon, she swallowed hard. You're both dead. The car raced through the dark streets, tires screeching with every sharp turn. The city lights flickered past in a blur, but Jordan wasn't looking outside. He was staring at Vanessa. She knew something. Something big. Something that could explain why his father, a man he had thought was dead for 6 years, was suddenly alive. Something that could explain why Caleb was murdered right in front of him. Something that could prove he wasn't a killer. Jordan's hands curled into fists. His father groaned beside him, pressing a bloodied hand against his side. Jordan turned to Vanessa, his voice low but sharp. Start talking. Vanessa's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. We don't have time. Jordan slammed his fist on the dashboard. Make time. Vanessa's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror. Jordan followed her gaze. A pair of black SUVs were behind them, closing in. Jordan's stomach knotted. Who are they? He demanded. Cops? Feds? The guys who killed Officer Reynolds? Vanessa took a sharp turn, nearly sending Jordan's father crashing into the door. They're not cops, she said. They own the cops. Jordan's blood ran cold. He looked at his father. His father was too pale, his jaw clenched against the pain. Dad, Jordan said, voice shaking. Tell me the truth. What did you do? His father exhaled, then finally, I used to work for them. Jordan's chest tightened. Vanessa cursed under her breath. I knew it. Jordan's head snapped back to his father. Work for who? His father winced, but his eyes stayed sharp. They call themselves the Division. Jordan's body stiffened. The Division? His father nodded. It's not a gang. It's not the police. It's something bigger. A network that controls everything. Politics, law enforcement, even the streets. Jordan felt like he couldn't breathe. And you were part of this? His father looked away. I was their enforcer. Jordan's mind spun. His father, the man who had raised him, who had kissed his forehead at night, who had taught him how to ride a bike, had been working for criminal overlords? Jordan shook his head. No, this doesn't make sense. You were a mechanic, a regular guy. You weren't. I was lying to you, Jordan. His father's voice was raw. To protect you, to keep you out of it. Jordan's pulse pounded in his ears. His whole life had been a lie. And now, because of that lie, Caleb was dead. His breath came out shaky. Did you kill anyone? His father hesitated. Then,
Yes.
Jordan felt sick. Vanessa swerved, dodging a trash can as the SUVs sped closer. We don't have time for a therapy session, she snapped. What we need is a way to get out of this alive. Jordan's head was spinning. None of this was real. It couldn't be real. The father he had mourned was a criminal. Caleb had died for nothing. And now, they were being hunted. His father groaned, clutching his wound tighter. Jordan snapped back to the present. Focus. He looked over his shoulder. The SUVs were nearly on top of them. One of the masked men leaned out the window, raising a gun. Jordan's breath hitched. Vanessa? I see him. Bang. A bullet ripped through the back window. Jordan ducked, his heart slamming against his ribs. We need to lose them, he shouted. Vanessa's eyes flickered with determination. Hold on, she muttered. And then, she whipped the steering wheel to the right. The car spun, tires screeching, before slamming into a narrow alley. The SUVs overshot the turn. Jordan twisted in his seat, watching as the SUVs skidded to a stop, their tires screeching against the pavement. They had seconds before the men figured out what happened. Vanessa slammed on the gas. The car shot forward, speeding down the alley. Jordan's hands were still shaking. His father was still bleeding. And the Division, whoever they were, weren't going to stop until they were all dead. Jordan turned to Vanessa, his voice hoarse. How do we stop this? Vanessa's jaw tightened. There's only one way, she said. We find out who inside the Division really killed Officer Reynolds. Jordan swallowed hard. And then what? Vanessa's eyes were cold. And then, we burn them to the ground. Jordan's pulse pounded. This was it. The only way to clear his name. The only way to avenge Caleb. The only way to survive. They had to take down the most dangerous organization in the city. And they had to do it before the Division found them first. Because if they didn't, they were already dead. The safe house was an old, abandoned auto shop on the outskirts of the city. The neon lights of Chicago flickered in the distance, but here, it was all shadows and silence. Vanessa pulled the car into the garage, slamming the brakes. Jordan barely waited for the engine to cut before he threw open the door and rushed to his father's side. His father was pale, too pale. His breaths were shallow, his face slick with sweat. Dad, stay with me, Jordan pleaded, gripping his father's arm. We're gonna fix this. His father forced a weak smile. You sound like me when you were a kid. Always thinking, you can fix everything. Jordan's throat tightened. Vanessa swung the door shut and grabbed a first aid kit from the shelf. Help me get him inside. Together, they dragged his father into the shop, laying him down on an old workbench. Vanessa ripped open the first aid kit and pulled out a roll of gauze. This isn't gonna hold for long, she muttered, pressing down on the wound. His father grunted in pain but didn't fight her. Jordan's hands curled into fists. He needs a hospital. Vanessa shot him a sharp look. And what? Let the Division finish the job? Jordan clenched his jaw. She was right. They couldn't go anywhere public. Not yet. His father groaned, shifting against the bench. I'm not dying here, kid. His voice was weak but steady. We don't have time for this. We need to move before they find us. Jordan snapped. We wouldn't have to run if you just told me the truth from the start, he shouted. His father exhaled, closing his eyes for a second. You were better off not knowing. Jordan shook his head. Caleb died because of this. Because of your past. You should have warned me. His voice cracked. He was my best friend, Dad. His father's eyes opened, and for the first time since this nightmare started, Jordan saw it, guilt. I know, his father whispered. And I'm sorry. Jordan turned away, swallowing hard. None of this should have happened, but it did. And now, it was time to finish it. Vanessa tossed the bloody gauze aside. Standing up, we have a bigger problem, she said. The division isn't just going to let us disappear. Jordan turned to her. Then we stop running. Vanessa frowned. And do what? Call the police? She let out a cold laugh. The division owns half of them. Jordan's mind was racing. He needed to think. Fast. Then, an idea hit him. Wait, he said. You said the division owns the cops, right? But not all of them. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. What are you thinking? Jordan's heart pounded. We don't need the whole system. We just need one cop. One who won't take a bribe. One who actually wants to take the division down. Vanessa hesitated. That's a dangerous bet. Jordan looked at his father. His father sighed. Then, finally, he nodded. There is someone. Jordan's pulse spiked. Who? His father exhaled, then muttered a name. Detective James Holloway. Vanessa's eyes widened. Wait, the Holloway? The one who's been trying to bring down the division for years? Jordan's father nodded. If there's anyone who'll listen, it's him. Jordan's heart raced. This was it. The last shot they had. Vanessa pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. I know someone who can get us a meeting with him. She hesitated. If he doesn't shoot us on sight, that is. Jordan nodded. It's worth the risk. His father looked at him. His face was tight with pain. But there was something else there, too. Pride. You always were stubborn, he muttered. Jordan forced a weak smile. Guess I got it from you. His father chuckled, then winced. Vanessa's phone buzzed. She answered, listened for a moment, then hung up. We're in, she said. Holloway wants to meet. But we need to move now. Jordan helped his father to his feet. This was it. The final play. They were either going to clear his name and bring the division down, or they were going to die trying. 1 hour later, the diner was nearly empty. A single flickering light bulb buzzed above the booth in the back. Jordan, Vanessa, and his father sat on one side. Detective James Holloway sat across from them. He was older than Jordan expected. Gray stubble, tired eyes, and a badge clipped to his belt. He didn't look like much, just another cop who had seen too much. But when he spoke, his voice was sharp. Do you know what you're asking me to do? Holloway muttered, stirring his coffee. Jordan leaned forward. We're asking you to do the right thing. Holloway sighed, rubbing his face. I've been fighting the division for years, kid. And you know what happens to people who fight them? He gestured to Jordan's father. They disappear. Jordan didn't back down. Caleb is dead because of them, he said. I was framed. They tried to kill my father. If we don't stop them now, they're going to keep doing this to more people. Holloway studied him for a long time. Then, he slid something across the table. A flash drive. Jordan blinked. What's this? Holloway exhaled. Evidence. Names. Transactions. Documents linking the division to corrupt officers and politicians. His eyes darkened. I've been collecting it for years, but I never had a way to use it. Not until now. Jordan's breath hitched. This was it. The proof. Holloway leaned in, his voice low. If we do this, we go all in. No backing out. No second chances. He looked at Jordan. Are you ready for that? Jordan's heart pounded. For Caleb. For his mother. For everyone the division had hurt. He nodded. Yeah. Holloway smirked. Then let's burn them down. 1 month later, the division was finished. With the evidence Holloway provided, the FBI raided their headquarters. The corrupt cops were arrested. The higher-ups were dragged into the light. Jordan's name was cleared. The world finally knew the truth. But Caleb was still gone. Jordan stood in front of his best friend's grave, his hands in his pockets. The wind was cold. I did it, man, he whispered. We did it. He took a deep breath. I just wish you were here to see it. A hand rested on his shoulder. His father. You made him proud, he said. Jordan nodded. swallowing the lump in his throat. For the first time in weeks, he felt free, and as he walked away, he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.